it comes to depictions of nobility within sci-fi, it's inheritance based off material wealth. Maybe technology, maybe corporations, basically just an inheritance of CEO to CEO. In the Carrick and Trade Baronies of Lancer, the mech tabletop RPG are still well into that. That's just the inheritance of all those manufacturing from thousands of years ago. Or in particular, the mining aspects of it. Blowing up stars, taking entire asteroid belts apart. But there's another aspect of sci-fi nobility that things like those CEOs to CEOs kind of miss. It's not a dynasty of just owning wealth and having contracts to protect you in the general system benefiting just your class. It's also, in particular, having class. Hi, hello, and welcome back to Lancer, the mech tabletop RPG, which I actually managed to introduce already. Today, we're talking about the Carrick and Trade Baronies again, but in particular, one of its major houses, the first of covering the major houses, the House of Glass. A federalist house, and supposedly the fanciest, set up on fair ISPAHSALAR, the jewel of the Baronies. Sure, there's the jewel and throne itself, Caracas, sit within the heart of all the Baronies, but ISPAHSALAR is the fine jewel in its crown. And the house itself, alongside its minor houses, pay a great deal to actually keep that well polished. From their ships, their manufacturing, and specifically the artistry and workshops of it all. And probably the second closest SSC relation out of all the other SSC relations within the Baronies. That one's a probably though. But where to begin with fair ISPAHSALAR and the House of Glass? So, the Baronies themselves were in the Norm Passacaglia and spreading out to the stars. And of the various worlds found and colonized, one was ISPAHSALAR. Now, in the early colonization phase, no one exactly owned the planet. Various bits of minor nobility and minor houses would come down and claim different parts of it, but it wasn't until someone back all the way over on Caracas, or namely the Prime Baron or the Emperor at the time, would recognize your house as the one in charge or owning the world, or the charter or the title, the claim being supported by the central authority back in Caracas. There were various reasons to fight for these on many other worlds. When it came to Caradin, that was a gift given by the one in central Caracas. But when it came to ISPAHSALAR, the jewel part goes a bit more literal, hence the glass part, as the planet itself was filled with them. Generally an atoll planet, so difficult mining it, but plenty of gems within the few bits of land masses and deep within the oceans, to the point that it outproduced most of the other planets at the time, within the fine precious stones, gems, and things that the nobility were suckers for, and high technology. But in general, it's that, hey, here's this fancy giant rock taken from a world a few light years away. So a lot of different backstabbing, pushing, making deals behind the table, and trying to present yourself as the one who should deserve the title. Because there were a lot of houses with a lot of influence. The one that won out in the end was House Delamar, which, keep track of that name, that's going to become very important later. But owning the title, things go on in the Norm Passacaglia. Business as usual, developing large systems, having a ton of stations within orbit for the mass extraction, namely because the atolls themselves and the landscape didn't really pay that well to have people living on it. The small bits of landmass were dedicated to the extraction at the time. And eventually the norm fell. With a massive bit of wealth and resources that ISPAHSALAR had gathered, it decided to secede from the rest of Carrick in space and just generally stay on the sidelines, not really taking one side or the other or another bit of nobility, just independence. And not one it fought for. The war itself had already gone off proper. But after Tyrannus does his thing and eventually the fleet led by his son rolls around, an outreach program to begin with, and they actually end up accepting because Tyrannus is of Delamar. That's his house. From this peaceful reintegration, the House of Glass has been staunch allies of the Prime Baron and the general major house systems. Even today, within the recent history, it can be seen with the First Interest War how far that commitment goes. So during the Battle of First Interest War in Creighton's world, two major houses were the ones that greatly supported the general federal fleet, that being the Glass Brigade under the House of Glass, and then other forces left by the House of Stone. House of Glass at the time had moved from the gems as those various bits of mines dried up, and had moved up into the various stations that most of their population lived on. Massive ship manufacturing, resources coming in from different systems, or the stretches of their own system, and already having the harbors and space waiting for it. They were the artisans of the Carrickan Navy, with the Glass Brigade itself being an immaculate work of art and tactical brilliance. Well, tactical's the strong word of it. Mechanically it was fine, but then Creighton Harrison kinda did, kamikaze to fleet and then also exterminatus the world that they had taken. ISPAHSALAR and House of Glass was a navy house. Most of their high nobility, entire minor houses just wiped out. It's fine navy, it's fine fleet, it's fine actual ships, and not to mention, even in the words, is the various countless ignoble dead alongside it. But it's definitely an afterthought in the minds of the minor houses of today and then. But that event and loss of the fleet was deeply scarring within both of those houses. Namely, when it came to the House of Glass, their takeaway was that mechs. mechs are where it's at. Alongside updating their navy in general, but the manufacturing of chassis and having various bits of pilots, cuirassiers, pancrati, they are the most specialized, well-trained, and hyper-focused into just the Lancer, or cuirassier or cavalier, depending on just the general local speech. But they have some of the best mech manufacturing and in particular workshops out of the rest of Karakin space. They also have the largest installation of the Royal Karakin Foundry, the largest found in Karakin space in ownership. They also haven't abandoned the Voidcraft. If anything, they have reinvested in that to try and remake the Glass Brigade, or make up where it fell off, where it was lacking, to just make a new grand fleet to help with this new armament campaign, one that they were already a part of alongside House of Stone, both redoubling their efforts. Where the House of Stone would go more into the fortifications in large numbers and general militarization, when it came to the House of Glass, it was the specialties, the tools, the individual people using it, all highly funded and all highly trained and kept to a precise standard. But that's its history. What about the fair planet itself, ISPAHSALAR? Mentioned as the jewel of the Baronies, well, namely by themselves, the planet itself is a work of art. With most of the mining and industrial capabilities taken from the planet itself in the past 1,000 years, having moved very close elsewhere, the planet itself is a fine set of beautiful, pristine archipelagos with various bits of arcologies placed on them, and all artistically renditioned, the planet itself sculpted down to the square kilometer. The entire planet. The majority of the people themselves, out of the 15 billion that are on the planet itself, are technically not on the ground portion of the planet. If anything, they're in the orbit. Though unlike the horrific Kessler syndrome waiting to happen mess above the IPSN homeworld, or capital world, ISPAHSALAR has an entire lattice work of stations above it, and multiple skyhook resorts that dip into the atmosphere. Where the majority of the 15 billion people live, that lattice work itself also thousands to millions of different ship harbors. Just a net and weave of stations that seem to go across the entire planet, jutting out further and into the atmosphere, while also stretching out into the stars, holding onto massive capital ships, being able to gather that resources from its bounty and its multiple holdings. And the world itself being some kind of grand beauty in this presentation does not just stop there, it goes down to the individual. Because just as much as it matters that their ships are beautiful and fine functioning, not just in appearances, but beautiful in their capability, whether it be a ship being able to jump to near light with a flawless precision and even having some kind of fancy light show involved, or a weapon being able to cleanly slice through any kind of bulkhead. All of it while looking like a piece of art. This stretches down to not just the craftsmen, and not just the nobility. The ignoble are also expected to uphold some kind of general standard, where House of Order would have their religious traditions and them also being very asinine about it. House of Glass is obsessed with your posture, your etiquette, your speech, your clothing, your fashion choices that laid out and have an influence on the rest of the Baronies. Because alongside their manufacturing, propaganda is another thing they're experts at. Multiple romantic serial dramas, television shows, books, artistry, song, music. If it was popular on ISPAHSALAR, it's going to be a popular thing on the other parts of the Baronies soon. Even when it comes to their cavaliers, their Lancer equivalent, the finest of the general, well, knights. They're mech knights. Orcus especially shows this, but it's just their general knight in shining armor now in the modern day, not in their past histories. An individual on the battlefield having a ton of gravitas, bravery, and stopping power. To the point that they are celebrities. They just truly are. Multiple romantic serials written about them, highly praised, everyone's wondering how they're appearing to the passions. Their fashion, the word choice, their drink of choice, sponsorships, and down to their pakrati as well. I might be mispronouncing that. The pakrati are fighters within power armored duels. Now these duels have been going on for a while. How far back, no one really knows, but even involving power armor and hard evac suits, that's also been going on. But since in modern times, mech chassis have been able to get down to just, well, the half height and equal to power armor themselves, microfusion reactors on board you. Essentially, the Atlas is a great favorite and initially was designed for this. Just two Raidens going at it in a lifted cage at the Capitol. Though with all those details, the heads of fashion, talent, culture, paying up to the passions, there are a few noted minor houses. So first up, we have Delamar, as it's still around, the one that won the title and the one related to Tyranny, or Tyrannus. They're an ancient house, all the way back from Passacaglia. Not the first, but that Anorum, holding great influence, namely just from being around, holding multiple investments and grand traditions that date back to their house and have reflected on the rest of House of Glass. There's also House Montague, which holds and champions the House Banner Company. Less Fulgurites. And lastly is House Memphis, which has a seat representing them on the Baronic Council back on Kraka. But outside of that, those are the details of the house we have. Namely that, hey, they're influential, deeply tied to culture, have fine workshops, namely in fleets first, then mechs, obsessed to the point of having multiple ongoing romance serial dramas of living and dead mythologize previous cavaliers, treated as knights in shining armor not just as in the violent kind, but in the romantic nobility kind, all the Arthurian legends, specifically the romantic telling of all of those, and those legends. Courtly love, the jousts, the duels, the fighting grand beasts and quests for a noble and godly goal. House celebrities. The last official thing tied to either minor houses, major house, is the Banner Company. We've already talked about it with Montague very briefly in just that they own it. But the less Fulgurites are known for being extremely well funded and well presented. Custom chassis, most of which are imported from SSC, but the Cuirassiers are known for specifically morning cloaks. Fast and immediate combat, and rapidly using the Fate engine quite frequently. The pilots of these morning cloaks themselves having used the firmament so often and for so long that they have to be continuously wearing these large silver suits, protecting them initially from the various hazards that can go to the mech and the pilot, but stated that over the consistent and continuous amount of times going through the firmament, that it's physically needed to keep them in their suits. That they begin by showing less of themselves, being a bit less sociable, and then continuously wearing the suit outside of their mech. And the most ancient ones having so many different components to keep them stable that they get confused for voladores. The voladores! Cavaliers and cuirassiers confused with valedores. There is a story waiting there. But alongside their actual effectiveness and just teleporting into melee combat, essentially, in ambush, they're also known for being that intimidation factor from these knights that have seen whatever's beyond over and over and over again to the point that they can't leave their suits. Or at least decide not to. An intimidating figure. But before moving on and just wrapping this up, I'd like to add in some conjecture. So, yeah, this section of the video right here, and probably what's coming next. Wait, no, it's that way. About the House of Glass and seeing where we can take it. When it comes to the workshops and that close tie to SSC, namely the Morning Cloaks being a premier line and a large number of them within the Montague's line, of Cuirassiers within the Banner Company, and back in the SSC video mentioning that SSC would prefer having some kind of physical workshop nearby or campus. The Baronies probably has SSC campuses scattered throughout it, and if there was any specific planet or house that would specifically have a large, massive SSC campus, multiple foundries, forges, various bits of craftsmen. It specifically calls their mech sites workshops, not factories. SSC has to have some kind of campus on ISPAHSALAR, or at least very close to it. Because it's not just ISPAHSALAR that they're importing to, or exporting to, or from. It's all the other parts of the Baronies as well. I don't doubt that other parts of the Baronies also have campuses, but if there was anyone to have, again, another specialty in fine craftsmanship, presentation, rich, ostentatious, both effectability and visual appeal, SSC and ISPAHSALAR line up perfectly. But lastly, a grudge. Refocusing on the Navy, focusing on mech chassis particularly, not just for preparing the rest of the Baronies, but similar to the House of Stone, but not admitting it. They're preparing for war with Harrison again, or the rest of the galaxy. They are angry. That scar was left on House of Stone, and they wear it proudly on their face, where ISPAHSALAR hides it. The House of Glass hides it. But their recent shift in manufacturing, mech production finally outpacing ship production as well, they're preparing for war. And one they are deeply scarred by. Where the various people within the House of Stone were a general large front line and still lost multiple nobles, the Glass Brigade, the finest fleet within all the Baronies, piloted by the big names in minor houses, lost. Entire family lines and dynasties gone. Alongside all the investments, house treasures, ships that have probably been around for thousands of years, investments believed potentially with holy significance. If anything that the holy significance of the passions tied to their cavaliers are to judge anything by, they also tied it to other parts of their culture. A flying cathedral carrying your father and king just dying out, that's gonna shake things up. And lastly to this conjecture, potential houses. So because I am very bad with making up names on the spot and when writing the script it was a block, they're probably gonna show up here, so this house are a shipbuilding family, a navy family. They've been known for being within the lattice work and the various bits of vessels that have been able to go off from their harbor and the massive foundries for them. Weapons, fine figureheads, holographic or physical, but in particular for how ancient their foundries are, being some of the original free-floating stations before the lattice work was constructed or added to. This family themselves having lost almost everything with the Glass Brigade. Most of their ships, but namely, most of their heads of the family. Large bloody succession crisis happened shortly after the First Interest War, but now, if anything, They're looking for revenge. While they can't officially declare war on Harrison yet, they can certainly sell some cheap ships over to those that are actively fighting them. Or you have a religious house, one that pays great heed to the passions. Oracles, temples, the Xena glossary taking up stay within their homes. This family's deeply concerned with the passions, with a bit of a turn within the younger generation. You have some that are leaning more towards this bit of liberalization they've heard about from the various books coming out of Aryudai, but then another set within the younger generation and extended family that's heading towards the Neo-Passacaglia route. What doesn't help this potential internal family conflict on how to run their local holdings and lands is the fact that the aging matriarch is fallen into looking to signs and taking up multiple potential charlatans that are acting as oracles, believing that the passions are all feuding over their house and the future of it. And another, we have a rivalry with Montague, specifically within the Banner Company, a bit jealous that they've held on to it for the past few decades. They've been heavily investing within their own house company, making whatever deals they need with outside manufacturers to try and bolster their own ranks, and specifically invest them into doing something that can outdo the Montagues and their less Fulgurites. Not just in, competition or outdoing one another on the battlefield, but sabotage. And within these ranks and this attempted sabotage, a forbidden love is found between them. And in all this backstabbing, presentation, paying up to the passions, tradition, fashion, and warfare, fear the rose's thorns. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope that it added some kind of summary or maybe some ideas on what you could use the house for in your later games. Tackling the first major house was a bit of a strange thing to do, namely because which one to do first. But I figured ostentatious noble is something that almost anyone could get behind trope-wise. But when it came to actually using them, they have a nice foundation, really, and a great history that's fleshed out, at least in relation to Tyrannus and how they relate to the Prime Baron. But there's some gaps here and there, the relation to SSC, the Navy itself, the naval influence. They should really have a large fleet. If IPSN is being tied to the sailor vibe and industrialization tied to the various bits of Kessler syndrome around their planet, and the massive shipping, why not focus on the admirals? Those traditions, the fact that you have an entire massive foundry within space around you, a lattice work of stations. Not to mention, what major houses own those arcologies? Are they basically just entire palaces, privately owned on those few islands and bits of land? The majority of the local 15 billion population being in the lattice work? They're deep scarring with what happened over Creighton's world and the Glass Brigade, and those Fulgurites. But outside of all that, this is a jumping off point. It's a thing to take and see what you can do with in your own games. And I hope that I could add something to that. It's only a few other minor houses and maybe a potential other way of looking at the stuff we've been given, but hey, it's your house of glass and presentation is everything. But thank you again for watching, a thank you to my patrons. Have a nice day.